So, Tom Lou, welcome to The Journey. And The Journey is a show that we put together actually 75 plus episodes ago. And it is just an opportunity for me to just talk to some individuals who have, throughout their life, they've had experiences in which they have either recreated themselves, transform themselves either through some type of struggle. It could be anything from mental illness to addiction to suicide, or maybe they found themselves in a career that they outgrew and they needed to do something different. But nonetheless, they have had setbacks and they found a way to fail forward. They found a way to transform themselves. And really, this show is about how to capture that experience and those stories, and how can we learn from those things and pass that on to someone else. So Tom, we've known each other for, like we were just the other day talking, for a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, going
Yeah.
all the way back to seventh grade in middle school, and all the things that from football to girls and all the things in high school and college. But we'll get into that in a little bit. But um, so
Yeah.
so if you could, just for the people that are listening, what does Tom do when he has an opportunity to have fun? What does Tom do for fun?
Wow, for fun. Okay. Well, Kevin, thanks for having me. First of all,
Yeah.
on the show, on the journey. I'm a fan of the show, and I remember before you even started it, and then you got into it, and you started and all the guests, and I've seen many of the episodes, and it's just really great what you're doing, and so many great people you've had on, and their stories are amazing, and so I'm honored to be here. Fun. Wow. It you told me right before we started you were going to ask me that, and
Yeah.
I'm debating on what I'm going to say. I'll tell you two things. First of all, and it's true even though it might sound like it's not, all the work that I do is
Mhm.
actually fun for me. I love what I do. I've been able to create a career, if you will, in different ways that all together works together, and it's a lot of fun for me. It's a lot of work. It's hard work, like everybody's careers are, but I love doing it, and I've been able to put the pieces together to be able to do that, and so all of that together is fun, which we'll talk about some of it probably. But in addition, for fun, honestly, I'm outdoorsy. My wife and I, we go outside. We live in Florida now. I've lived in Rockford most of my entire life until just a couple of years ago. And so now, we go outside, we walk, we ride bikes, take our dog to the beach, things like that, active things. And one of the things that I do for fun too, when I can, which hasn't been a lot lately, obviously, but I do photography and stuff, particularly or specifically concert photography is
Mhm.
something that I fell into, believe it or not. Anyone that knows me might be surprised at that, but I never intended to do that. And it just sort of happened. And that's a story in and of itself. But I love music. I love rock and roll and all kinds of music, not just rock and roll, country music, rock music, pop music, whatever. And I love playing it, creating it. And so that's always been a constant for me. And so now later on in life, being a musician myself for 35 years, I don't know, long time, to be on the other side and to photograph musicians and artists and things over the last 10 years or so has been a really a fun thing. It's something I didn't expect it to be so fun. Hard work too, stressful at times, but really cool. So
Sure.
I like creating things, So I guess the short answer to my long answer is that I like creating, and that's fun
Nice.
for me. So
Nice. Okay.
yeah.
Well, it is as I reminisce and go back to how we met, right? We met in playing football together, right? And back then, middle school, most of us we were three sport athletes, right? And
Mm,
we'd be
yeah.
involved with either football for most of us, and then either wrestling or basketball, and then it was either track or baseball or whatever may be going on in the spring. And I know that that was a part of your upbringing in middle school and high school was sports, but you also very much got into music. When did the music bug really click, and what's the story about how that clicked, not just listening to it and appreciating, but playing?
Yeah. Well, probably the answer is early 70s. for me. I remember being really young and being, enamored with the Beatles and all the bands of the day. The Osmonds, the Osmond brothers, Donny Osmond and his brothers had the band, the Osmonds, and all of that stuff from that period. I was enamored with it from my first memory. I don't know why, just as a fan, as a listener, I couldn't believe the stuff I heard. And I was immediately captivated by not only just liking it, like everyone loves music and listens to whatever they like, but I was immediately captivated by how do they do that? How do they make that sound? How does that work? And just from a very little kid, I remember I used to write out the names of the Beatles on paper with pencils, and I would have the E's were backwards, and all of that. I had these papers. I would write John, Paul, George, and Ringo, and I was just enamored with it. And that just was my first memory. I don't know. And then that just continued all through. And then we get into, when I got into my adolescent years and everything, I took it from being a fan of it and enamored with it to wanting to play it. Before that, I was pretending to be a radio DJ. Like a lot of kids, I was recording myself on cassette tapes and doing the top 40 countdowns and talking about all my favorite bands and artists. I would tape it off the radio, and I was, saying I was a DJ at these radio stations in Rockford, some of which I work on later and still to this day, and all of that kind of stuff. And then I got into learning how to play, and I got into rock bands, playing drums and all of that. And I wanted to know how to create it. And I wanted to know how to create it, Kevin, because I wanted to, in my own way, at whatever level I could, affect people in the way that it affected me. Create something and then put it out there, and then other people went, wow, I really like that. That means something to me. That spoke to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I find a lot of value in that. And I wanted to do that too, if I could, to whatever level I could. And music was one of the first ways that I did that, going all the way back, 15 years old or whatever it was. And to this day, I still do it, still create music. I still write music. I love it as much as I ever did. In fact, out of all the things I do, it's still my number one love.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Still is.
Sure, sure. Well, and as I mentioned, and as I mean, obviously we have a lot of memories of playing sports together during those middle school and high school years.
Yeah.
And then as we graduated in '86, and then you and Greg went immediately down to Illinois State. I stayed up because of bodybuilding, stayed up and continued going at Rock Valley, and went to community college there and did the bodybuilding thing. And then I joined you guys our junior year, our third year down there. And by that time, you guys had already formed a band, started playing. I think, if I remember correctly, it was the second band you had down at Illinois State.
Yeah.
And the band that I don't fully think I realized I was going to be living with a rock band that our living room was the practice area. I don't think I fully knew that. Maybe you told me, but I don't know if I fully, really heard that part, but,
Yeah. Yeah.
but that was obviously a big, huge part of the experience. And I think, the one thing, I always had an appreciation for music, very similar to yourself. And then I took some music appreciation classes, which really elevated that.
Hmm.
But, one of the memories that I had, specifically that junior year in college, was that there was these, or at least how I took it, there was these rules around music being played when there were non-practice or non-party time. Like,
Really?
yeah,
This is interesting to me. This is fascinating because I don't know that you've ever told me this, but
yeah.
I'm
Oh,
interested. What rules?
yeah. Well, it was like, I only remember us playing different forms of classical music and blues or jazz during, either if we were studying, or if we were doing stuff around the house. I mean, obviously, if we had people over, that was, other music, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, when you guys were practicing, that was the music you guys were practicing. But I clearly remember, different, being introduced to a different level of understanding jazz, in different aspects of jazz music, blues music, classical music. if I end up, because the first room I had was a modified porch, if I remember correctly, that
It
was
was,
enclosed,
yeah.
that didn't
Yeah.
have heat in it, but it worked because it was small, so it worked. But because I think I would use Greg's room to study in because it had a desk in there if I wasn't going to the library, and I
Yeah.
remember listening to George Winston and
Mhm.
other uh, more recognizable or older classical music, right? But that was one of my memories of remembering that. Um, and the other thing I remember about when you guys played out was this. Um, you would take, they were covers, and you guys would modify and change the presentation of music that was done by someone else, regardless
Mhm.
if it was Led Zeppelin or
Mhm.
Kiss or Mountain or whoever it may be. But it was Simon Bar Sinister's version of it, right? I mean, it was
Right.
which was the band's name at that time,
Mhm.
and so I think those were the two of the. I mean, there was 1,000 memories that I have from that time period, but regarding the music itself, those were some of the deeper appreciations that I got from living with you guys regarding that piece.
Yeah, that's amazing. Those are I don't think you've ever told me that in all the years we've known each other about that. And I don't remember it being like a rule, but you're probably right to some extent. It was a rock band, and so that was always what we would listen to and play. But then I know I personally then and now, I mean, I'm huge into, all kinds of music, but instrumental music, ambient music, some call it new age music, just all of that kind of stuff, classical stuff sometimes, and yeah, and different kinds of jazz or R&B, whatever it is, because I always wanted to be exposed to as much as I could so that I could learn from it. Like I was saying earlier, how do they create that? And anyone who knows like rock music knows rock music was born out of the blues in the first place. So,
Mm-hmm.
that was all a part of it. But yeah, listening to other styles of music was really important. And I probably had something to do with that back then
Mm-hmm.
when we were living there and doing all of that. And to this day, I still play that kind of music. I listen to that music for relaxation and when I'm studying or working and I need to concentrate and focus and different kinds of things. Although on my shows and stuff, I talk to a lot of rock musicians and others, but that's predominantly, who I talk to because I know those people. I know that genre well, so I have them on. But my interests are so far outside of that as well, and that's interesting that you remember that. Yeah, those were crazy times. And you may have reconsidered moving in if you had known that the living room was the practice spot. you know
Probably not. Probably wouldn't
yeah.
have reconsidered it, and I don't necessarily, well, and in that case for me, it was the first time I had lived outside my parents' home. I didn't know at all,
Yeah.
I think, if I think back, outside of being with some, uncles or, family members, staying extended period of time is when we would go to NIU for the football camps, when we did that, and we had, roomed together during that time period. Um,
Yeah.
and so it probably for me wasn't that aspect of adjustment, because this whole adjustment to going away to school was a big change. Even though I had, had been all over the country competing, I
Yeah.
hadn't necessarily lived outside of the area. So it was a whole different culture, whole different
It,
thing.
yeah, it was. And at that point, like you said, you came, and that was our junior year that you had come down, and then we lived together for the next 2 years in two different places, two different houses. Right, that's how that went. And then but yeah, it was different. And back, those were different days for me. Obviously, that was a long time ago. That was the mid 80s, late 80s, and so things were a lot different then. For me, in good and bad ways. It was crazy as a young guy doing. We were crazy. We were doing crazy things. We were living that lifestyle, the rock and roll, and all that goes along with it. That was just a part of my story. It's a big part of my story. And as weird as it sounds, and other people probably echo this, but I'm grateful for that.
Hmm.
Because it taught me a lot about me, and I learned a lot, and many years had to go by until I could understand what that meant to learn from that and to get on the other side of that
Right.
stuff today, to also then, inform a lot of everything that I do today and have done for many years, but I had to go through all that. And had I not gone through all that, I would have been on a completely different trajectory, obviously, all of us. And so I'm grateful for those days, even though they were hard. I know they were hard on you at times, they were hard on other people. We were hard on ourselves, but
Mhm.
you grow, you live, you learn, you transform. And that's what happened. Absolutely.
Well, and that kind of goes into where I wanted to go a little bit, is that it was a very unique time period, and there was no, we were getting we were getting a lot of attention from this particular
Yeah,
student body, because I had just recently, won the Mr. USA, and I was in that whole fitness and bodybuilding world, and that's a whole, that was still the '80s, so that wasn't like a super popular type of thing. So that was a whole unique group of people, and then we had these long-haired, rock, hair band, and all the things that they talk about. Those two different groups were all mixed in our house, and when we would go out, those two groups were the groups that mixed. And I still have people come up to me that I know from, Tim Hare and Doug Livingston and those guys that, were, were living there working, they were bodybuilding or working out at that time. And then, but then we coexisted, we lived together. Right. And that was it was all those things that very much, when people will look back in that time period, I'm like, yeah, they're not making that stuff up. That was really how it was. I mean,
true.
it was those things, the good and the bad and the ugly of it.
For sure.
You know,
It's interesting, Kevin, that really quick, you mentioned a couple of people there. I hadn't thought about those guys in a long time. And yeah, I remember those guys. And it was a whole different cast of characters in and around our house and our lives then. And yeah, I've always said, there was 20,000 people at Illinois State back in the late 80s, and five dudes had long hair, and we all lived in the same house. And then we also lived with our great friend Kevin, who was a bodybuilder and a champion bodybuilder, and he was our built-in security guard and all of that and all these things, and it was just such a weird conflux of people. But I got to tell you, when I reflected on it all these years later, so grateful for that for a lot of reasons, because we had to learn how to really get on with so many different kinds of people, as you're alluding to. We had to learn how to, our band went from being hated by the fraternities. They couldn't stand us. We were these long-haired guys, we were these obnoxious guys, partiers, rock guys. And at the time, most of the fraternity guys were, they had the clean cut look, they had the collared shirts and all this and that. We looked totally different. We had leather jackets and, the whole 9 yards, and they hated us until they didn't, until our band started to get more popular and we started to play at all the bars and clubs and parties all over the place at ISU. And then we started getting asked to play at the frat parties. And then we graduated up and started playing at the frat parties for a lot more people. And then they loved us then because we got to know each other. And we
right.
realized, we might look different, but we're really not all that different. And isn't that just a metaphor for so many things in life? We
Oh,
might look different, but we're not that different. We're just
right.
people. We're going through the stuff and we're figuring it out as we go. And we're interested in what we're interested in. And we can coexist and we can work it out and share the differences, but still share something in common as well, which in this case was music and fun and having a good time and enjoying all of that. And we did. And so that was really interesting to see how that all shifted in just, a year's time, really, and that journey, that transition has stayed with me to this day. And to this day, when I, interact with people, and no matter where anyone's coming from, and it's no secret to anyone, we live in a world that's really divided, and
Right.
there's all kinds of stuff going on. And those skills that I think we got to learn, not because we set it up that way, that's just what happened, but they've become really useful even today, in all these years. That's how I look at it anyway. And I talk about it like that a lot. So.
I think it's so right, especially as we reflect back on it, is that yes, there were certain things that, regardless if it was me with bodybuilding, or you with long hair and, the look, type of thing. That's not necessary to say that we knew exactly what it's like to be of a minority race, right?
Right. No.
Or have some other thing that you physically can't change. But what it does allow us to do is to have a greater level of empathy, that
Mm,
that that when we know what it's like to be looked at with a dirty look, or looked down upon,
mm,
because of the story that people told themselves, which then, of course, then we told ourselves stories about the people that were looking down at us. So we
yeah.
were no better because we were judging people who we thought were judging us,
Yeah. For sure.
until we weren't, because slowly some kind of relationship on some level of getting to know each other formed, which
Mm.
may really be the antidote to all this division anyways.
Absolutely. And you make a good point. As far as obviously I'm a white male in the United States. I understand fully what that means. I can intellectually understand uh, those that are not white males and women and other minorities, whatever the challenges that they face. But I can't fully experience it because I've not experienced it. But we work to do that. But I understand what it was like to be discriminated against because I was a guy with long hair,
Right.
even in a period of time in history when that was kind of the style and the fashion. Looking back on some of it now, it looks kind of ridiculous. It's like you look at the pictures, like, what? Why was I wearing that? Why did I have a string headband on? That's kind of goofy, but whatever. But we got discriminated against all the time. You just walk into a place and immediately we're ostracized, made fun of, called every name in the book because we looked like girls, that whole thing. And that was a real education besides the education that we were getting in college, studying the things we were studying. That was really interesting, and it changes you. Like I said earlier, it informs so much that goes with you decades into the future to the current day, and I think because of that, among other things, I'm a much more, listen, we all have our moments. Let's be honest. I have my moments when my tolerance for certain things is lower than it should be or whatever, but I'm a much more tolerant person overall because of some of that stuff. I don't want to overemphasize it, but it's true, so.
I want to transition because I think that's such a huge point, and I would kind of want to transition into, so post college, right? So we, for different, we graduate in '90. Clearly, you guys weren't done. I was still doing the bodybuilding thing. We venture out to Denver, Colorado, the foothills of Denver. We're trying to, or the Colorado mountains, Rocky Mountains, and we're trying to, you guys are trying to make it in the band. I'm trying to recreate myself out there. It just happened to be, was it 1990? Was it 91?
91. Yeah.
91. Yeah. Little did I know when we went out there, or I agreed to go with you guys out there, that there was a recession going on. And I had options to be a personal trainer, working in a bar bouncing, or a stripper. And the fact that I can't dance probably wasn't going to make that work very well. um,
Again, another little nugget there, the
yeah,
stripping
yeah,
thing. I don't
yeah.
know that I remember that
Yeah.
fully, but okay.
There was a ton of strip bars out there, guys and gals. I just remember that
Yeah.
that's a whole nother story. We don't need to get into that. But um, that going out there, what do you remember about that time period? About, again, trying to bring the band, the what was in college, trying to bring it now into young adult life. And I know that was there were some struggles with that. What do you remember about that time period and trying to make that transition?
Well, I don't think I've ever been asked that or thought about it in that way. It's a great question. I remember, like you said, it was post college, graduated from college, had a degree, great. And now I was off, and the degree went into the back pocket. And some of the guys that, from college, and one guy in particular had family who lived out in Colorado. That's why we ended up out there. They had a house out there. We were young guys in our early 20s. We didn't have any money, but we had a place to stay. It was a nice house in the foothills. Like you said, it was in Morrison, Colorado. You could see Red Rocks Amphitheater out the back of the deck of this house. It was quite a nice spread for a bunch of young punks like us. But I remember going out there thinking, yeah, at the time, the plan was we were going to make this band happen that had been in, and we were reforming how that was going to look and sound and all of that. And that was the plan. And we were going to go out there. And ultimately for me, the plan was to make it out to LA, to California. So Denver was 2/3 of the way there. So that's what I was thinking, and Greg and some of the others. But you're young and you're figuring it out, and we thought this is a new beginning. I packed up a truck and towed my car out and all that. I remember being excited. I remember being scared. I remember being, how is this going to work? I don't remember having any kind of job or anything set up. I ended up, doing the jobs that people do when you're doing something like that. I worked as a bartender and a waiter and, stuff like that. Some other things I don't remember, but I just remember doing that. But I was excited. It's like, oh, I got my whole life ahead of me here. Here we go. We're going to do this now. Got the college thing out of the way. And, but it was challenging, and it didn't, like a lot of things in life, right, Kevin? It just didn't go the way that we thought it was going to go. Problems happened, relationships fractured, and there were issues. And in my case, a lot of that stuff was fueled because of, substance abuse, drinking, drugs, all that kind of stuff, which was very prevalent in my life and most everybody's lives that I knew at the time to some degree or another. And so that's what happened. And it kind of fell apart really within about a year of it happening. And I remember I came back to Rockford and, I felt lost. I felt, I don't know what I'm going to do now. This plan that I had that I was really excited about, just sort of came and went, and it just didn't go the way I thought. It was my first real experience with, I guess, for lack of a better word, failure. It didn't go the way I thought. And I had to regroup. I had to figure out, well, what's next, And so, but going out there was exciting and great memories and everything. But the expectation and the reality were far apart,
Sure,
So,
sure.
yeah.
Well, you bring up something that, I very much paralleled, at that point, when I went out there with you guys out there, bodybuilding had ended for me. Maybe about 6 months before that, 9 months before that. Definitely because of some of choices on my own, but the reason why I hung up my posing trunks weren't necessarily mine, but it definitely was a result of my choices. It was part of it, and I always look back on, for me, the lifestyle of bodybuilding, what was what was so dangerous and toxic for me. The sport in itself probably definitely encouraged that, and the aspirations of this is going to be how I'm going to make it was all part of that story, along with a lot of different things. But it definitely had to do with the lifestyle that started playing a physical toll on my body, as well, definitely psychologically, on me. I know, even though I was very much around you guys and involved with it, the the upside about the bodybuilding lifestyle and world for me kind of kept me out of certain aspects of the partying because I was so
Hmm.
focused and
Yeah.
so imbalanced with that. Not that I wasn't around, it just was that I didn't partake with everything. But I know that, a lot of people that may be listening, have seen documentaries, or movie, shows that have made about, the show about Motley Crue, and all the different things that, I think about what, specifically Nikki Sixx did when he put that film together. In telling his story about what the lifestyle was like, and not that that wasn't made into other movies with the same type of thing.
Mhm.
How do you think, as you look back on it, how was the 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 rock lifestyle, the the yearning and the longing and the ambition to make it, but then the lifestyle, how did that start paying a toll post, not only during when you were out in Colorado, but then maybe coming back? How did that all play a toll? And obviously, as we know, or as I know, maybe not the audience, but the listeners, I know that there was a bottom too. So why don't you tell us
Yeah.
a little bit about that story?
Yeah. Well, I'll try to condense the, basically a decade there into this. It did take a toll. The whole music was pure to me when I was a kid, as I was talking earlier, and I loved it, and I wanted to be a part of it, and I wanted to create it, and I loved all of it that went along with it. And I participated in all of the sex, drugs, and the rock and roll and all the things. And then, we went up to Colorado, and that whole thing just didn't go the way that I came back to Rockford in 1992. And I thought, well, okay, I got to reinvent myself. I got to figure this out. I still had every intention to continue playing music and all of that. And I was still going to do it, just had to do it differently. And, what happened to me was, Kevin, is that what I understand now is that the lifestyle, like you had alluded to with the bodybuilding, the lifestyle of the rock and roll and the partying, it 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 caught up with me, for lack of a better word. And it took years for that to happen, but it caught up with me. I talk about on my show, I heard somebody say a long time ago, there's like 3 stages of partying, all fun. Stage 1, stage 2, fun with consequences. Then stage 3, all consequences. And it was all kinds of theories, but that's just such an easy way to sum it up. And that's kind of what it was for me. By the time I got back from Colorado in the early 90s, early into the mid 90s, I started into that phase 2 of that model. I was with fun with consequences. I started experiencing consequences. And the first of which really, if I look back on it, was the falling out that I mentioned from in Colorado with one person in particular, and how that just all devolved into a big mess. And we weren't friends anymore for many, many years. And then I moved back. That was the beginning of the consequences. And so moving through the 90s and everything, like a lot of people, your life changes, you're getting older, you're starting into your jobs that aren't just, part-time side gigs. You're starting into a career path of some sort, at least you hope you are. And for me, then that turned into, getting married, having a kid, and all of that kind of stuff. Life changed a lot, but what didn't change for me, despite all of that life stuff happening, was the drinking. Mostly for me, it was mostly drinking. I wasn't a big other type of drug user per se. I experimented and recreational with a lot of different things, but it was always the drinking. That was just something that, for whatever reason, that's what worked for me. And when I say worked for me, what I mean by that now, I understand now, is that it just made me feel more comfortable in my own skin. What I didn't understand is, why don't I feel comfortable in my own skin in the first place? I learned that later as to why that was. But through the 90s and everything, it was just, life was going on, and it was just, normal for me. Everybody that I knew, and most everybody that I was friends with and associated with, this is what you did. You drank and you did this, you went to bars and on the weekends and holidays, and it was all that. And I'm not suggesting you can't do that. There's a lot of people that can drink normally. And I found out that I wasn't one of them. It was always excessive, and I couldn't understand it. I never understood it for a long, long time. And I just thought, well, this is just the way it is, and that sort of a thing. And so life went on, and my consequences got higher and more significant, to the point where, for me, it came down to divorce happened for me 4 years after I got married. So now I was a single parent. Coincidentally, at the time of that all happening, divorcing and all that, my career started to take off in terms of what I was doing and the money I was making and all this kind of stuff. So it was this weird dichotomy there, and I was just confused. And the way that I placated those feelings and those conflicting things was more drinking. We get into the early 2000s, and you talk about the bottom. And for me, by at that time too, in the late 90s, I'd gotten out of music. I stopped playing in bands when I got married and everything. I was doing the right thing, the responsible thing, and I abandoned this thing that I loved. And I was resentful about that. But into the late 90s, I reformed a band. I got back into a band. I started playing again, and that was fun and exciting. And that still exists in various ways to this day, which I'm glad about. But get into the early 2000s, just, it was all consequences for me, as I was saying, that stage 3 of that. And it was every time, anything that ever any bad things that ever happened to me, any bad consequences that happened, always there was drinking involved. And I started to look at that, and I tried all these different things, and I had moments where I quit for a period of time, and I had some sobriety time, but I was mostly doing that at that time, Kevin, to prove a point to the people that were on my case about it. I had people in my life, you need to cut down, you need to stop, you need to this and that and the other thing. And they were just, Charlie Brown's parents in my ear. It was annoying. And I wasn't ready. I'm still in denial about it. Like, not a problem. I just overdo it a little bit sometimes. It was my thing. The band was going. The band got successful in back in Rockford and in the Midwest in general. We recorded an album. We were playing all the time. We did all this stuff, and I was, again, it was like the '80s all over again. I was living this lifestyle, only it was a decade later, and the drinking back then was here, and then it went up there, and it got to the point where I just had enough, and my body was physically breaking down. I could, just getting sick all the time, and just things were coming out of me that shouldn't have been, and not to be gross, but these are facts. And I just got to the point where, I had to do something different. So all I knew, my story is, and I know everyone can have different paths on how they go about this recovery thing. But for me, all I knew to do was go to an AA meeting, because at the time, this was the early days of the internet, and that's all I knew to do. So I literally, Kevin, got into the phone book one night in late 2002. I remember I came home, I was really drunk, and I got into the phone book and I looked up Alcoholics Anonymous, and I wrote down a number, and I just put it on the side of my bed. And then 2 months went by, more what Steven Tyler calls days of night. And that's what it was for me. It was days of night, and it was bad. I don't remember a lot of it, quite frankly. And finally got to the point where 2 months later, I pulled out that number and I called, and I found out where there was some meetings in Rockford. And I went to the first one on December 17th, 2002. I went to my first meeting. And for me, what I heard in that first meeting, the things that other people were saying, again, the criticisms of 12-step or not, people that are pro or con on that, I understand all that. I'm knowledgeable about that today way more than I ever was. But for me at that time, what I heard in that room from those people, they spoke about this subject of drinking and consequences in ways that I'd never heard anyone talk about before, not like that. And I just knew instantly that I was in the right place, and that for the first time in years and years, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could do some of these things that these people said that they did, which I didn't fully believe, by the way. I couldn't believe that, but I thought, well, I'm going to, and so I just thought, I'll come back tomorrow. And I did that. And then that turned into a decade of consistent 12-step attendance for me. And it worked for me. And fortunately for me, I haven't had to drink or go back to that lifestyle ever since that time. And I give a lot of the credit for that to the fellowship and what I learned in there, because what they taught me was way more than just not drinking. Because I thought you're going to go to a meeting and you're going to go to the AA and you're going to be miserable, you're going to be angry at the world, and you're just going to muddle through the rest of your life drinking bad coffee, and maybe if you smoke cigarettes you would do that or whatever, and it was better than the other way, but it wasn't going to be very good. That's what I thought. And I couldn't have been more wrong about that. Not only I learned that it wasn't about stopping anything, but for me, recovery was about starting, was beginning again in being like shot into a new life that I didn't have any idea really could exist, minus alcohol and drugs and all that stuff. And that's exactly what happened. But in order for that to happen for me, Kevin, I had to do the work to understand, like I said a few minutes ago, get back to the beginning and why does this stuff here, when I take it into my body, make me feel different to such a degree that I like it so much better that I would willingly choose to do it in escalating quantities over a 20-year period of time to cause me all this pain and suffering? What's going on with me first, way back before I ever took that first sip? And that's what I learned in 12-step groups. And I had no idea, none, that I was going to learn that. And probably the greatest gift I think I've ever gotten was that. And the people that were there for me when I needed to hear from people that way. And so I know it's a long answer, but that's what happened. Life changed and all these things. And I used to blame it on this, that, and the other thing, all these external factors. And when it came right back down to it, what I ultimately learned was it began and ended with me and the choices that I made. And I understand that some of us get dealt different hands. We get dealt different cards that can significantly influence if someone is a substance abuser or not, or whatever. There's genetic things and all this stuff that we can talk about this way, but it came down to, regardless of the hand I got dealt, I still had choices to make every day, in every way, moment to moment. And what am I going to choose? And I still have those choices right here, right now. What will I do? And life has been very hard for all of us for the last 2 months, and some way worse than others. And, I fear, I think about this a lot. I fear that a lot of people maybe have, suffered and maybe backslid into habits to try to cope, with the stress of it all and all of that. And I'm sure you encounter a lot of that in your work and whatnot to some degree, and I feel for that. But, the bottom had to happen for me, and I had to resolve to have the courage to do something different. And I talk about that a lot in all my work. Do something different. Petrified, scared. Kevin, I work in media, I speak, I do all these things that put me on places where a lot of people are like, oh, that's got to be so frightening and terrifying to do all that stuff that you do in front of all these people. And what if you got something on your face? And what if you say something stupid? And what if they don't like you? Yeah. What if they don't? Sometimes they don't, right? I mean, that's just the way it goes. But here's the deal. Nothing was more terrifying for me. Nothing then or since was more terrifying than the first day that I walked into one of those meetings. I was absolutely petrified. Nothing comes close to it for me. Why? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but nothing I do today even comes close to it. And I knew somehow that there was a reason for that. I knew that my fear, there was a reason, and that was why I had to keep going, because there was something on the other side of it that I didn't fully know. That's why I was so scared. And that was the only thing that was pushing me along. And, we all have spiritual, whatever you want to say, if something was pushing me along to say, just do this. And more will be revealed, as they say in those meetings. More will be revealed. Trust the process. Take it a day at a time. All those cliches that I used to loathe, now I love, because they're true. Every one of them.
That the aspect of what you were just talking about, to be on the brink of that chasm of what your normal was, and clearly you knew you had stayed too long. Clearly you knew that it wasn't working anymore. But like myself, my fear of doing something different was terrifying. But recognizing, crossing that threshold, going into that meeting, sitting down in the meeting, right? Crossing that threshold meant you just went over that chasm into the initiation phase of what we call the space, that sacred space where we're going to start doing that transformational work, right? And so of course, the reason why I talk about that part is because some people think that feeling that you were just describing is that, oh, I must be in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Nope. It means you're in the right place.
Yeah.
If you weren't scared shitless, it meant that you were doing something you were familiar with, which that should scare you shitless, because our familiar was the problem.
Yeah.
And we needed to be in a situation where nothing was working anymore, and I had to be open to learning how to do this different.
And the price was big. Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, that being scared that way, yeah, you put it in a different way, but yeah, that's exactly what it was. I just knew. But there was a huge cost to that. I was scared for a lot of reasons. And some of the things that I was afraid of actually happened. Like, I'm going to lose friends. I did.
Yeah.
Or at least I did for a period of time, temporarily. And then some of my bandmates, for example. I was talking about my band. I was in the band. I was at the height of my band's popularity, and I told them, I'm not. I'm going to AA, and I'm quitting drinking. Was what I said. And that's all I knew to say. I don't say it like that anymore because it's not just that, like I mentioned earlier. But okay, And 6 months after going into that first meeting, I made one of the hardest decisions I ever made. Again, was I left the band. I chose to leave the band that I founded and formed nearly 7 years earlier at the height of its popularity, at least in the Midwest where we were from. And that was a huge price to pay. But the reason we played in bars. And at that time, especially, I couldn't justify and rationalize and reconcile. How can I be in bars every weekend playing gigs around all this, as you said, the familiar? I wasn't in the place. I wasn't strong enough. I didn't understand enough yet. Not enough time had passed. I couldn't do it. And so I had to make the tough call because a guy, a friend, still a friend today in the meetings, he was a music lover, a guy named Bob. Love Bob. He said to me, he asked me one time after a meeting, came up to me and he said, I tell this story a lot, but it's so important. He said, hey, you still playing in that band? It was like 6 months in AA. I was doing well, making progress, but he's like, you still playing in that band? I said, oh yeah. Yeah. He's like, huh. And he goes, good luck with that. And he walked away. I was stunned. I was floored. I was mad. I was like, really? Good luck? What do you mean good luck with that? I was livid. I left there. I was in a huff. I was like but I was thinking about it for a day, 2 days, and 3 days. I don't know how long it was. Long story short, you know where I'm going with this. He planted that seed and I knew what he was saying. He was saying, Tom, if you stay in that situation, the likelihood, the odds of you maintaining this new sobriety that you claim to really want and need, your odds are going to go, way down, and he was right. And it wasn't long after that I made the tough decision and I left that situation. And I don't think I would have ever made it if I hadn't. I know I wouldn't have. Not me. Maybe other people would have, but I wouldn't have. And so that began a bunch of years of, I avoided those kinds of things. It was just the way that it had to be for me. I found new things to do. I found new friends, new places to go. And to my surprise, Kevin, there was a whole nother world out there of life that I had no idea existed. You mean you can have fun on the weekends and on holidays without being bombed out of your mind? That's possible? I mean, I'm saying this sarcastically, obviously, but I didn't think that was possible.
Sure.
And I've talked to so many people that I've worked with in recovery since then. When they're newer into it, especially, they don't think it's possible. It's normal to think that, I guess. And I'm like, no, but it is. And so I just had to go through it and experience it myself. And not only is it great and fun, it's better, way better. So if nobody hears anything else that I'm saying the rest of this time before or now, hear this. If you're stuck somewhere, whatever it is, I call them the AVDCs, the addictions, vices, devices, distractions, or compulsions that ail you or someone you know. If you're stuck in any of that, anything like that, or multiple things that way, and you can't see a life beyond it, you think it's going to be less than what you have now, I'm here to tell you that's not true. It's not. But you can't snap a finger necessarily and have it change. You got to go through it. You got to give it a chance. You got to let it breathe, as I say. And I promise you, if you do, and you surround yourself with the right people that works for you, there is another life, and it's a better one. And today I'm happy to report that a couple of the guys that I played in the band with then and still now are on a similar journey now. And it's not because of me. It's because of their own story and their own journey. But what a gift that is. Mm-hmm. So now get to play in the same rock and roll band, but without all that junk. What? It's amazing. It's wonderful.
Sure. Well, it's there's this, band that, try to work hard to trying to make it, that has a similar story, at least from what I understood, from what I've read. I think they're called Korn, and Brian Welch's
Brian
story,
Head Welch.
Right? He same kind of situation, right? Had to stop. He had to stop doing meth. He had to stop drinking because it was killing him and he was going to lose his daughter. And he tried to do the sober thing when he was in Corn, and then at some point he had to make that tough decision that he had to let go of Corn at the peak of when they were at the top of their game. Now I know later he went, circumstances changed or and whatever, and I don't know all the behind the scenes, or I just know what I've read or told. But I think you make a great point. There is a distinct difference between someone stopping using substance, alcohol, whatever it is, and getting sober. There's a distinct difference between somebody being sober and someone being in recovery or transforming, right? We talk about it in the counseling world is that people come in for counseling because they want to feel different.
Yeah.
Okay, there's absolutely, that's great. Yeah, I want to feel different. I feel crappy. I feel anxious. I feel depressed. I want to feel different. We're gonna do counseling. But when you want to be different, that's the transformational work that we do in therapy. That's the transformational work that we do in recovery versus just getting sober to avoid some more consequences. And and that's not easy work because, like you said, we got to go back into the stuff that was going on before we ever took the first drink, before we ever started the lifestyle.
The stuff that me for sure, wanted to avoid in the first place.
Right.
I wanted to avoid it. And drinking for me helped me to dull that, to dilute that, to push that away. At least that's what happened to me. But I had to go back to those things and look at those things. And really quick, you mentioned Brian Head Welch from Corn. I interviewed him on my Sound Matters show, and we talked a little bit about this. We didn't get into it super in depth because I had some time constraints with him, but yeah, we alluded to that. And he was saying the same kinds of things. That's right. You had to go back and look at those things, those pain points that for whatever reason, whether they were brought on by ourselves, by choices we made, or they were just cards, like I was saying, or cards that we were dealt in one way, shape, or form, family or genetics or combination of a bunch of whatever. And so, it was a huge thing. And he revealed a lot of that. Yeah. And then he ended up returning to the band and still with them to this day, but he had to take that break. And in his case, I mean, he sacrificed millions and millions and millions of dollars to do that. He paid a higher price than a lot of people ever would or could because of the level of success of that band, past and present. But you're right. The going back and to look at that stuff, that's the hard work. And that's the part, Kevin, that I found and I find still that is the big barrier for people to push through this thing. I think a lot of people know, I know this is an area and I know, but the answer is not one that they want. Like you say, go to counseling to feel different, to feel better. And being sober and being in recovery, those are different things. 100% agree with you on that. The emotional sobriety as to understanding, well, why, and the heightened self-awareness of why did I do. People say, how do you not drink anymore? And the answer, and they say, don't you think about it sometimes? Wouldn't it be nice to have a beer or a drink on a hot summer day? Yeah, of course. But here's the thing. Today, I understand much better why I did. And I also understand what happens when I do, which is not the same for everyone. And when I understand the why I did in the first place, and then the tools that I've been learning and still learning, by the way, it's not over. I'm not done. This is a daily thing for me. It's a different kind of work than it was, say, in 2003 than it is in 2020, but it's still a thing that I have to do. But when I understand the why and my awareness of those things has changed, the allure, the attraction to it totally changes. When? I don't know. It's different for everyone probably. And again, whether we're talking alcohol or shopping, I don't know, whatever anyone's hung up on. I think it's the same kind of a process. It's getting into that and doing that inner work that's really hard to do. And a lot of people don't want to do, but it's so necessary. And it's one of those things, I say this a lot too, Kevin, easy to say, hard to do. Yep. Easy to say, easy to talk about, but hard to do, hard to put into application, but no less necessary and so important. And important for who? not for the people that were on my case back then, not for all the people that I was initially trying to placate when I was quitting for temporary periods of time, but for me, selfishly for me, because my life got better. Perfect? Nope. Make mistakes after sobriety? Yep. Lots? Yep. Hard things, tough things? Yeah. But different because I didn't also have this monkey on my back also in the mix.
Yeah. Well, you said something, and I'm going to willing to jump there. I'm going to go a little bit deeper dive into this, okay? Because that's where
Good.
I think it's kind of important, because I think we got some listeners that want to hear, what's behind the scene type of thing, right? And so, I think, there's a physical part, right? We got to physically do something different. For you, it was refraining from mood altering chemicals, right? Because they took on a life of its own. For me, it was the whole. It wasn't lifting weights. It was the lifestyle. Everything from the anabolic steroids to the amphetamines to the different things that went along with that, because everything was about enhancement of performance, everything that went along with it. But when I started doing the work, tracking back of what was behind all that, right? And it took time. Had to get past the anger, there was a lot of stuff I had to get beyond. And the weird thing about the anger part was that I never considered myself an angry guy, but it was mostly because I was probably suppressing that anger because I didn't want to be an angry guy, right? So I would be, oh, I'm okay. That was a whole different issue. I had to learn how to feel,
Mm-hmm.
because I knew how to do, I just didn't know how to feel. So that was an element. But there was this element that came about not wanting to be invisible, not wanting. So there was an element of not wanting to be invisible because I had a taste of what it was like to be visible.
Right.
And once I had a taste of what it was like to be seen or be visible, ironically, I don't know if I was actually seen. People just saw me. I don't know if I was actually seen, like people really knew who I was because I was performing. But that became the driving force to do some crazy disciplining, pushing my body to crazy limits, doing different things like that. And as well as mentally. And I borderline have to be careful today with that same thing, because it doesn't go away,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now it's not bodybuilding, but work can do the same thing.
Absolutely.
You can easily go into a workaholism thing, easily go into, when you're an entrepreneur, when you're a business owner, you're never done, right? I mean, so that's, oh, wow, that reminds me of, looks similar to, smells similar to.
It does.
So so I throw that out kind of like just to give you an example. When you think about what was that, if there was a why, right, that you've identified, if there was one dragon that you had to face, and I know there's multitudes, right? Just as I was just mentioned, there's a lot of different dragons that we have to face. If there was a core dragon or theme that you had to face, and now it's something that you got to keep in front of you, what would you say?
Hmm. Well, that's a good question. Probably, is somewhat similar to what you said. You said the word invisible. By the way, just to throw this out, shameless plug, the conversation you and I had, a couple of years ago, you're on my Recovery Collective podcast. I think it was episode 5.
Yeah.
When goes and searches Recovery Collective, there's a conversation that you and I had about, more specifically about your story that way. And it was a good conversation, and love for anyone to go check that out. But the thing for me was probably, I came from divorced family when I was a little kid. So mom and dad were not together from the time I was 2 on. So if you would have asked me when I was a young guy in my late teens and 20s and 30s or whatever, I would have said that doesn't have anything to do with it. But looking back on it, I think that was a part of it. Finding my identity, who am I, my relationship with my dad, being seen by him and achieving whatever I thought would be to get that recognition and encouragement and support and validation. For me, it's probably those kinds of things, real generally, that was for me. And also for me, I've always been a person, well, like I said earlier, I've always had lofty ambitions, wanted to create things and do things to whatever level. It's never been about money or fame or anything like that. It's been more about just making a contribution that matters to somebody else. And I've always wanted to do that in various ways. I have, but I think when I was younger and using alcohol a lot and other drugs, I was the guy, I was the woulda, coulda, shoulda guy. I would always talk about, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. But maybe the fear of that, the anxiety of that, the daunting nature of, that's a lot of work to do that. How in the hell am I going to do all that? I would just talk about it. And I would be, drinking, telling everybody what I was going to do. And I never really did a whole lot of any of it. I mean, I worked, I did my things, but it wasn't until after I got on the other side of that and I started to really in earnest, since 2002, all the things that I do today. But I think I was running from that kind of stuff, approval from my parents, maybe my dad in particular, stuff like that, which I know is a common thing, for a lot of people. I just didn't know who I was, as a young boy, as a guy, as a man eventually, so always figuring that out. And for me, that struggle was dulled and muted with alcohol. It helped me feel less of that existential crisis. I don't know, whatever you want to call it, And so I had to keep that in front of me. And even to this day, like you said a minute ago, I can be a great worker, and I'm never done. It's not 9 to 5, Monday through Friday for me. It's never, it hasn't been. And so that's something I gotta be careful about that, and I have to watch that because, I can substitute the working and the achievement of the things that are important to me, that I love to do and that I think add value. But if I lose myself in the process, like you said a minute ago, it looks very similar to the alcohol, and why I used it for that. I'm using just something else to, again, change my feeling state, because that's really what it comes down to, feeling states.
Yep.
When I don't feel good for whatever reason internally, I want to do something to feel different. So I do this or use that or take this in or whatever it might be. And we all do that to a certain degree. And I think for me, it's just this ongoing maintenance of, where am I right now? What's going on with me? And doing the self-reflection. For some people, it's praying. For some people, it's meditating. For some people, it's the outdoors. For some people, it's painting or music, whatever it is, but coming back to center and going, okay, what's going on with me? And hopefully having the tools and the honesty and the courage, quite frankly, to own the stuff that's not working and call yourself out, and have other people that you trust, counselors, good therapists, friends, spouses, whoever, family members, to say, hey man, I'm calling you on your crap right now, dude, you're off base. You're I was like, oh, really? Okay. And you might not like it. And sometimes I don't like it still. Like, I didn't like Bob saying that to me about the band. Doesn't mean he wasn't right. He was absolutely right. And I'm grateful for that, So I got to keep that stuff in front of me, because I don't believe, Kevin, I'm cured per se. I don't know. It's a word that people use. Are you recovering? Are you recovered? Is it ing or ed? I don't know. I'll let people fight that out on the internet. All I know is that I don't choose to use that stuff today, and I'm a work in progress. And as long as I keep doing those things and applying what I've learned before, and still, I got a chance at this thing, because I know what happens if I go back to that. I know, because I spent 20 years doing that, I know what the outcome is going to be eventually, sooner than later. What I don't know is the future this way. And for me, the last 17 and a half years, I guess at this point, I don't often say that out loud, but yeah, I had no idea what it was going to be like and how good it was going to be, and challenging too, but good more than not. And I don't know what the next I hope I got another 17 and a half, So that's what I say to people, that, this road, you don't know this other road. Right. Give it a chance. So.
Right. Tom, we could go on for a long time, and
Yeah.
I definitely want this particular talk today to be part one, because I know I want to have you come back on the show if you're open for part two, because there's a ton of stuff that you've done in this process of recreating yourself in the last 17 and a half years, which doesn't have a ton to do, it isn't completely different than your history. Actually it has a lot to do with it, but not in a shaming, oh, that was bad, don't, ostracizing it, stigmatizing, all that. It's actually, as you said earlier, grown as a result from it, and then appreciating all those things. So
Yeah.
I'd love to have you back on, and we do a part two of what
Welcome.
it's like to be a master's level degree, teacher, speaker, lately actor, photographer, all these different things that you're doing. um, but one of the things I ask people at the end, especially with some of the powerful things you talked about today, if there was one thing that you wanted the listeners to leave with, what would be one thing you would leave with them, want them to leave with right now, uh, until they hear from you again?
One thing, I probably said it previously to some extent, but it's basically this: whether a person is in the throes of some active addiction at extreme levels of any sort, of any type or not, or they're not, and they're just a regular person, that's struggling to get through the day to day for whatever reason, whether in the midst of a global pandemic or not, or just their job or their financial situation or their relationships, their kids, whatever it might be. We all have stuff. We always will have stuff. Whatever it is, what I'd want to really encourage someone to say is that wherever you're at, it's not the end. Even though we know what it feels like it is, or it could be, it's not the end. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it's not the end. And you're just, again, you're just one decision away from a whole new life. And I say that, again, sounds easy, but it's hard to do. But you're literally one decision away. If you want a new career path, you can have it. If you want to stop using this or that or the other thing, or change your lifestyle patterns in this way, you can. It's work, it takes time, you need other people. You can't do it alone, or you shouldn't anyway. I mean, maybe some people can, but I would advise against it, because isolating is a great technique to avoid really being honest with yourself and stuff like that, or getting called out on things, having that accountability. So my thing is just wherever you're at, if someone's listening, you think it's the end or close to the end, or it's hopeless, it's not. It's not. It absolutely is not. Reach out to somebody, ask for help, have that courage. I tell people this: asking for help and saying, you know what, I think I've been beaten down. Maybe I've been beaten. Asking for help and owning that is actually the biggest sign of strength that someone can demonstrate. Whereas it seems that it's counterintuitive. I was always afraid that if I asking for help and admitting that I was at a low point or defeated, that was weakness. It's the opposite. It's strength. Most people don't do that. Most people don't ask for help. They isolate, they just keep it on the down low, and they keep going. They put the smile on, and it comes up in all kinds of other negative, destructive ways, as you well know, to the ultimate ways, which is people taking their own life, or any other number of things. And so if you think you're at the end, you're not. You're a decision away from a whole new life that honestly, honestly, honestly can be so much better. Reach out to me, reach out to you, reach out to anyone, and begin today. It can be done. It can be done.
Tom, I think that's a great way for us to close, that this idea that a strength that we would never know comes from that sense of vulnerability. To be vulnerable comes a strength that is immeasurable.
Hmm.
Tom, if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you? If they wanted to either hear about your program on Sound Matters, or tune into the other projects you're doing, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you, or follow what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm just going to throw out, I've got a lot of websites, but my name, tomleu.com, Tomleu. It sounds like I have two first names, but Tomleu.com. That's my main hub website. And on that site are links to everything else that I do. And so that'd be a great place to start. I got an email list like a lot of people, and for people to keep in touch with me and things that I'm doing now and going forward, workshops and coaching, different things like that. It's all starts there. So tomleu.com is a great place. And then I'm just at tomleu, Tomleu, on all the social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, wherever someone is, that's where I'm at. So yeah, I appreciate you connecting with me that way. So Kevin, thanks so much for having me on here. Let me talk about this, and great questions. And every time you and I talk, I learn more about you and me and our relationship and our history, which goes back so far. It's wonderful. I love it, and I would love to come back for a part two anytime.
Perfect. Tom, you be safe and have fun down in Florida and continue doing the great work you're doing. By far, you are a light in the dark things in the world. So I appreciate you.
Thank you,
Okay.
Kevin. I appreciate you too. Thanks,
All right.
buddy.
Talk to you later.